Isn't it amazing and wonderful how our names can connect us to prior generations? And names are important, aren't they? We heard already this morning about new grandchildren and great-grandchildren entering the world. When you hear that there's somebody new in your family, what's the first thing you ask? What's the name, okay? And let's say you hear that a son or a daughter or grandson or daughter maybe has a new love interest in their lives. What's the first thing you want to know? What is their name? Exactly, exactly. So you see, names matter. And for those of you who are going on and doing study, like Will, possibly soon to college, and the others are budding literary scholars, you see, Shakespeare got it wrong, right? You all know what Shakespeare said in Romeo and Juliet? Okay. What's in a name? A rose by any other name. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other word would smell as sweet. Well, I love Shakespeare, and maybe you'll study Shakespeare in college. Maybe you will also, Chloe. And you and Matt and Natalie, you also. But the reality is, that's not necessarily true, because names are very, very individual. And there's a school of philosophy. I don't know if any of you are going to become philosophers, but it's quite possible. There is a school of philosophy that has been for centuries debating whether names really have meaning, and if so, what that meaning actually could mean. So if any of you can actually understand that and tell me what that means, that would be quite splendid. So you see, names have commanded a good deal of attention. But why are names important? Well, our reading from Genesis today is a really important reading about names, because names give value and identity. Names give identity. Our reading actually today opens with God telling Abraham and Sarah what God's name is. Now, it wasn't in the translation that Jan read. Jan read a translation of the Hebrew, but God initially says, my name is El Shaddai. El Shaddai. That is one of the most ancient names for God. And sometimes it's translated God Almighty or God the All-Powerful. But in fact, most scholars don't really know what the Hebrew means. In fact, it may be related to an even older word from an old language called Akkadian. That's a great language, though. And related to a word called mountain. So it could be God is saying, my name is God of the mountains. And what would you do if you knew that God's name was God of the mountains? I think fall down in awe and look at the grandeur of God. So names really matter. And names give identity. They give humanity. So let's think back in history to those times when names were taken away. The Holocaust, right? Those who were killed in the Holocaust, they were given numbers. In order to take away the humanity, they were given numbers. Because how do you love a number? You don't. You take the humanity, the value, the identity away from someone when they no longer have a name. We do that in our prisons too, right? Prisoners have numbers. They don't have names. So not having a name is a way of dehumanizing someone, right? If we don't call someone by name or aren't interested in knowing their names, we dehumanize them. And that's why it's so important what the students in Florida are doing. We've gotten to know their names, the ones who are leading the charge, and we've gotten to know the names of the students and the teachers who lost their lives. And by knowing their names and then affirming their humanity and their identity, we are even more moved to support and take up the cause that these students are going forward with. And I still remember this story of when I was in a rush, Becky, because we all get really busy, right? And there was somebody who was homeless. And he was on the side of the street. And he asked me for help. But I was so busy, I couldn't deal with one more thing. It was an overwhelming day. And finally, I just tossed him a dollar bill. And he said to me, "Lady, I don't want your dollar bill now. You didn't even bother to ask my name." See, everybody, even those who are homeless in Hyannis, the ones that you help at Street Reach, even those who have struggles with addictions, those who have mental health challenges, everybody has a name because a name suggests that there is a story. And that story is an indication of God's presence in their lives. And then, when we think of names, we actually can use hurtful names instead of names of love. Like over history, you know, we have the Wampanoag here on Cape Cod. Over history, what have we often called native peoples? Savages. Heathen, that's their name. Your name is savage. Your name is heathen. Rather than Wampanoag. You know what Wampanoag means in Algonquian? It means people of the dawn. Isn't that a much more wonderful name than savage? If you see someone and you call them savage as opposed to person of the dawn, see how your reaction is different? Names matter. They give values. But there's another dimension of name, and that's what comes out in our story this morning, the story of Abraham. See, in Jewish spirituality, there is a third name. The name that we are given at particular junctures in our faith journeys, or the name that we take on at particular junctures in our faith journeys. And what's really interesting, you know, the word for soul in Hebrew, neshama, it contains the two letters, which means name. Which means that within a soul is a name. Every name contains a soul. And so in Jewish spirituality, it is said that at certain junctures in your life, God calls you to take on a new name. And that is what happened to Abraham and Sarah. God said to Abraham, "Now is the time for me to create a new covenant with you because I have called you to become the father of a multitude. So I'm going to change your name from Abram to Abraham. And Sarah, you are going to have an important part in this new covenant as well. So I'm going to change your name from Sarai to Sarah." This was an important juncture in the life, in the history of faith. And God changed the names. So the question I'd like to pose for you today, when you think about your own faith journey and the juncture of life that you are living through right now, today, how would you describe it with a new name? Jewish spirituality says there are three names. And the third name comes at that particular juncture in your life when there is something significant in your relationship with God and how God is calling you to relate to God in a new way. And to take on a new name to describe that. Now, I'm not suggesting that you run to town hall and go change your name. This is your spiritual name. But I'm wondering what it could be as you think about where you are on your faith journey right now. What would be your third name? Faith? Hope? Perseverance? Courage? Justice? I don't give up? That could be a name. Peace. I don't bully. That could be a name. Thrive. Earth. The whole wide world. Blessed. It takes time to discern what God is speaking to you in order to decipher what is that name, my third name, that describes where I am at this juncture in my life and how I'm going to relate to God in a new way. So that takes time to discern, but is there anyone here who might have shout out, might know already, what is your third name right now for your children?
Believer.
Believer. Believer. Liz.
Hope.
Hope. Wonderful names. Yes, Wendy. Liberty. Liberty is a great name. Mary Lee. Gentle. Gentle. Beautiful. Now, how would it be if when we greeted each other, when I saw you, Mary Lee, I'd say, "It's good to see you, Gentle." Or you introduced yourself to Stuart and you said, "My name is Gentle." Or Wendy, say, "Hi, Liberty. It's wonderful to have you in worship this morning." Wow, that's powerful. Powerful. So, names matter. Names matter. And it doesn't matter what stage of life we are, whether we are in 5th grade, right? 4th grade. Whether we are a junior in high school, or a freshman in high school, or almost ready for high school. Yes, Natalie? Yeah, yeah. Or whether we are middle-aged and parenting, whether we are just retired, whether we are nearing the ends of our lives. God, at all those junctures, is calling you into covenant. Not to be Abraham, I can assure you this, none of us is really going to be the father of the multitudes, okay? That was Abraham, the father of the nations. But we can be something significant in God's greater world. To our families, our friends, the community around us, and our names, the names we claim through God's inspiration and leading, will guide us to what that's meant to be. Amen.